Hey everyone, welcome to the Active Towns channel. My name is John Zimmerman, and this is a very special video from the Strong Towns National Gathering in Providence, Rhode Island on June 10th of this year. Our tour leaders, Tom Nosal and Jason Degray from the Toole Design Group, will be talking about how Broad Street went through a major transformation from a dangerous STROAD to a absolutely delightful and vibrant street. And before we get started, I just want to say thank you so very much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And if you're enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Hey, it's super easy to do. Just click on that join button right down below or navigate over to activetowns.org and click on the support tab at the top of the page. Okay, let's get right to it with Tom and Jason.
Hello everybody, thanks so much for coming to Broad Street. Thanks so much for braving the potential rain, although I think we were blessed with a little window here to stay dry, hopefully, knock on wood. My name's Tom Nosal. I'm a project engineer with Toole Design. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us on this walking tour of Broad Street.
Appreciate everyone coming out. This is a project that Toole Design led for the City of Providence back in 2017. It's a project that I think, stands to be celebrated much more than I see it oftentimes. It's not the perfect project, which we're gonna get into the details of why I say that, but in many ways accomplished the goals that it set out to do. So the project on Broad Street was initially part of the City Walk initiative for the City of Providence, which kind of came out of planning for the city out of the removal of 195 or the relocation of 195 out of the downtown. And if you've been downtown, you might see the kind of open swath of land that's been cleared from that highway removal, starting to see the development come in, the new pedestrian bridge. That's part of the City Walk vision. The City Walk vision was to link the City of Providence from its green anchors on either end, which is Roger Williams Park to the south here, to India Point Park on the other side of the city. And the construction of it was essentially envisioned to start in 2017. Couple things to know about the project. Broad Street specifically, which is the segment we're going to talk about, it's one segment of the City Walk project. This is the corridor of highest safety concern in the state of Rhode Island. I think when we were getting started, some of the stats would say 20% of the fatal and serious crashes involving pedestrians and vulnerable users occur in the City of Providence, and the vast majority, maybe not the vast majority, but the largest concentration of that is here on Broad Street. You'll see as we walk that the width of the corridor varies, particularly from this point to the south. If you were noticing on the way in, there's a tighter segment to the north where this two-way urban trail splits to one-way bike paths. But from here south is the two-way urban trail. In some locations, the width of this corridor is over 50 feet. And particularly as you walk further to the south, the parking becomes less, utilized, and there was just swaths of pavement that were barren with little to no pavement markings. And there was a center left turn lane that ran down the center of the corridor, basically from this point south. So extreme excess pavement, a lot of pedestrians crossing, a lot of conflict between peds and bikes, and very, very high speeds based on that width. And the project, the City Walk project, was looking to connect the city, but also to address the safety concerns out here by reducing speeds, bringing accessibility improvements, and then this two-way urban trail. So at the onset of the project, there was a fair amount of skepticism from the neighborhoods abutting Broad Street. They saw the project, or were skeptical of the project, as one that was going to bring kind of that rolling gentrifier. Who are these bike lanes for? Are they really for the residents and the community members here in the neighborhoods abutting Broad Street? And the project brought a significant outreach and kind of component to it. There you have your traditional public meetings, but in addition to that, we had a community advisory committee comprised of nonprofits here in the neighborhood, as well as some community members. We had paid community ambassadors for the project that were compensated liaisons for the project that would attend events around these communities and elsewhere in the city to really promote what the project was all about. But the reason why we wanted to start the tour here at Public Street was it was the tactical demonstration project, which had a lot of change. And this is a model that Toole has utilized on future projects for really trying to get past loggerheads of, community not necessarily feeling why this project would be beneficial to them, a lot of distrust and a lot of sense of how can we show improvement without spending millions of dollars to build it out and do it quick and do it in a participatory way that lets the community kind of feel, as part of it. And that's what we did here at Public Street and to the one block to the south, where we piloted the two-way urban trail on the other side of the street where it was at the time, but also engaged a lot of local artists to, build out the, areas of excess pavement. You can still see some of the markings here, on Public Street behind us. You can see that fog line kind of pulling away from the curb. That was a remnant of the original bump out that was part of that demonstration project, which was a beautiful mural in that space. And we had flexible wave delineators, which were a little bit different than these flex posts. And you can see that's not the original mural, but that's one that came in more permanently after the fact. So this installation was a 2-day event where, we closed a fair amount of what you see around us and, allowed the community to come in and, paint the murals, really take ownership of the space, see and test the two-way facility. And that was kind of an instrumental moment in getting, support from these neighborhoods that in fact this was a project for them. And from there it was, taking the project through to final design and construction. I'll pause there, see if anyone has any immediate questions. We're going to be joined by Alex Ellis from the City of Providence, I believe, who's going to have probably some more he can lend to it, but I'm doing my best for the moment to fill in the gaps. So maybe a couple other points about the project. It was, essentially to reconstruct a corridor like Broad Street and really, move the curb and reclaim that space. You're talking tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars nowadays. The city had a federal grant of $2.3 million. That wasn't just for Broad Street, it was for Clifford Street and the Clifford Street Bridge heading into the Innovation District in downtown Providence, which was another phase of City Walk. And to essentially take that $2 million and spread it along Broad Street, we knew we had to be very judicious with how we were going to use our capital funds. So it was intended to be a tactical project. You can see the tactical elements with the flex posts. We put our capital into these floating bus islands, which, in circa 2017, 2018, these were relatively novel in terms of their actually being on the ground, built and understood. I think the city, if we're being honest, would say they learned a lot from this deployment. You can see at the front here the two broken, sign stanchions. Certainly when it's off peak and there's a lot of, volume coming down maybe at a higher speed, these floating bus stops, have been kind of known to pop up on drivers. And so I think some of the design based on these is one that has given both the city and RIPTA an understanding of where, perhaps some evolution of future designs could take place. But by having the buses in lane, lighting to the floating island, certainly, enhances the speed of that boarding and lighting process, and really works to, also supplement the traffic calming. Which, if you stood out here on this stretch of street before this project, I can tell you the speeds, it was intimidating. Great amount of traffic that was well in excess of the 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. I would say 40 miles an hour was probably your average speed prior to the project. They would have kind of ad hoc festivals out here. They call them Mi Sueno, which they may still have, but they essentially shut the street down for drag racing. And so, in terms of the traffic calming, the slowing of the speed, that's the greatest deliverable I think this project has brought. It's a much calmer environment now.
I think people sometimes, a criticism that people say is, well, I don't see that many people biking in the bike lane now, and it's important to remind people that even if you don't bike, everybody's benefiting from the lower speeds and the safer, just a safer environment that this cross section is producing. So that's a huge piece. And I want to follow up on something that Jason said. He said, he noted that this was one of the highest density of crashes in the state, and it was happening in a neighborhood with much lower than average car ownership and much higher than average use of active transportation and walking, biking, and using transit. So that was a big reason why this bubbled up to the top.
To put some stats in, 20% of the houses around here are zero vehicle households. 40% commute by walking, biking, or transit use. So it's certainly from an equity standpoint, it wasn't the high-speed corridor didn't match the demographics of what we're seeing in the neighborhoods.
We'll get moving in a second, but I want to go back to the cross-section too. Like Jason said, the configuration before this was a two-way center turn lane with one lane in each direction, or like the conventional road diet cross-section, which I think it's interesting that that is the sort of like holy grail that a lot of places are striving for when they have the four-lane sort of STROAD design. And I think it's noteworthy that what we ended up with here is and we could have kept that design if we had sacrificed a lane of parking. We could have maintained the two-way center turn lane, and I think that would have been the choice that a lot of designers or cities would have embraced, because there's a tendency in the transportation traffic engineering realm to people are more comfortable with like overbuilding for cars, and it's like we have this two-way center turn lane, it's working well now. Do we want to stir the pot? But I think the fact that we retained more parking helps the pedestrian environment feel safer, because you have just a much narrower cross section with more kind of that visual friction, and it's kind of physically protective of people on the sidewalk to have those parked cars. And also important for the support of the businesses in the neighborhood, because every time, take my firstborn but not my parking is kind of what you get when you talk about eliminating parking. So with that, I think we can move along, but if there's any questions.
Was there a big throughput spike?
Go for it.
Well, I mean, so the AADT, we should say, is like, it depends, but it's like 15,000 is kind of the cap. So it's really, kind of a matter of perspective. Like some people would say that that's definitely within the threshold of needing more left turn support and whatnot. But I think like the crash experience out here and the problem that they're having with speed and safety enabled the case to be made that was, addressing that had to be prioritized over.
Yeah.
Would you say, Jay?
Yeah, I don't think there was sheer traffic volume and throughput really wasn't at the top of anyone's list. The city recognized the need. The neighborhood wanted the safety issues addressed, and even RIDOT, who had some involvement here, which is part of the story, could not really combat. It was 13,000 to 15,000 ADT, which is well below, any real conventional road diet standard. But the R line and the transit, priority, that was a concern, and that was, wanting to ensure that RIPTA could still maintain the R line as its signature, high speed, high frequency bus service, was where most of the consternation around reducing the cross section came from. But even so, I think that the volume aspect was never really a big concern, but reducing the speeds were. And again, why are we doing this project? Is it for us, or is it for some other, plans that the city has around development to, basically open up these neighborhoods for, gentrification was the concern.
Check out like the speed, the turning cars, like the way, I just think it's really striking. I wish you could see the before, because like for us to be able to just gather and have a calm conversation, and obviously we're speaking loudly, but the vibe is just totally different from how it is when cars are going 40 miles per hour. It's just a totally different experience, much more comfortable. Yeah. And like I said, I mean, just watching that car have to turn around this bus island at like 6 miles per hour is just, you don't even think about it. Like your fight or flight is not activated subconsciously.
Which in a lot of ways was the effect of the demonstration project. And Street Plans, I should say, was one of our partners on this, Mike Leiden, and kind of the birther of tactical urbanism. But witnessing that speed reduce and that ambient noise level come down while installing things on the ground, and having those community members who were participating were all kind of bewildered, like, wow, just by laying out some pretty simple devices, we mitigated so much of what was really at play out here, and that had a tremendous effect.
Oh, beautiful. Just meandering down the urban trail.
Yeah, of course.
as one would do it.
Well, feel free to add any other color, to this. And
Speaking of color, I mean, I think it's interesting. So we'll talk a little bit more about how federal funding was not a part of this project, which I don't it wasn't because, but you'll note that the center line is the red, white, and blue for the Dominican flag because they have the parade for that festival
the
here.
center line
So
of
the
the
sort of
actual road,
non-MUTCD piece there that is just, I think, a really neat, component of the project.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty fun.
Providence kind of has a thing with that. There's like on Federal Hill, there's the Italian colors. Bristol, I think, is red, white, and blue for the parade there. So and it's like, it's not yellow, but everybody knows what it means.
Well, and I mean that just takes a little bit of being comfortable with the fact that you don't have to follow the MUTCD by the letter. I mean, you can use your engineering
Some judgment, yeah. In my opinion. I mean, that's,
Yes, well, and that's the whole point, is engineers can make their engineering judgment and make an opinion.
Indeed, yeah. A little more noisy here. I'm going to try to, I'd like to talk about traffic signals and how they were sort of the approach to traffic signal design in this project. So like Jason said, it was a relatively low cost for implementation. So it's about a mile, and the total cost for implementation was around $2.5 million. So that's not enough money to go and retrofit every single traffic signal on the corridor. So the approach, you can see that sign there saying instructing bikes to use the pedestrian signal. So that did a couple things. It allowed the project to be implemented without having to go and retrofit the signals to add separate bike signals. But it also kind of gets around one of the issues with using bike signals. Is everybody here familiar with the MUTCD? The manual? So I see a couple no's. That's the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. It's Federal Highway Administration's document that just dictates how pavement marking, signage, and whatever, also, and signals have to be designed and the way they have to work, basically. So what they say about bike signals is if you want to use a bike signal, it can't be showing green when any conflicting traffic can cross how the bikes are going, if that makes sense. So it's really, sometimes that's exactly what you want. You want to completely separate bikes from other traffic, but it's also pretty inflexible in that there's certain instances where it's appropriate for bikes to get maybe an exclusive jump on traffic where they can cross without having to worry about turning cars. But then if you are forced to give the bikes a red light while cars have the green ball and can turn right, it's just not real. It's really not realistic to expect that bikes are going to wait through the whole cycle like that, and you're going to have low compliance in a lot of situations. So I think that the way this works here, where bikes follow the pedestrian signal, is efficient in terms of cost. It's pragmatic and efficient in terms of how people actually use the street. And the other thing too is that there's a lead pedestrian interval for the PED signals, which if everybody's not familiar, that's before the light turns green for cars, pedestrians get a couple second jump. And that's actually like one of the advantages of just kind of the bones of Broad Street in this neighborhood is that there's pretty short crossings. So in a few seconds, somebody on a bike does basically have a little exclusive lead interval where they can get fully across the intersection before the light changes. So that right there, I think, is a big, piece of the safety benefit. Jay, anything you want to add on signals, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there was a lot of this contraflow bike lane. Having a two-way facility on one side of the street introduces, a movement that's contrary to what the vehicles are doing. And so, building on Tom's point, the engineers have their proclivity to design it to eliminate any potential conflict, which was going to lead to a much more costly solution of putting bike signals on all these locations. It was going to be a cost-prohibitive project. And the city made the determination, it's an accepted way of doing it, that they wanted to go with bikes just using the PED signal. And it does kind of speak to the functionality of the street. It's just more natural, it feels like, than this kind of very technical solution of having bike signals and all this fancy infrastructure. I would also want to point out it is City Walk. You know, a lot of the attention goes to the two-way urban trail, but there was a lot of accessibility improvements on the sidewalks. Wherever you see these new pavement, this was all new concrete. That was part of the project. So, you know, ensuring full accessible ramps along this entire stretch was part of the project. There was intentionality with the micro-mobility devices that a lot of cities see. Some here in the Northeast are not as prolific with the, you know, the scooters and the other micro-mobility devices, particularly scooter share. Like Boston doesn't have any scooter share. Providence was a bit ahead of the curve, and knowing that you needed relief for relatively, like we were saying, slow speed vehicles, your scooters, your one wheels, there was a relief with this urban trail that took a lot of that use off the sidewalks, and there was a little bit extra width afforded to the trail because of that. I'm not entirely sure what, maybe Liza might know more specifically what the bike share situation is here on the ground.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi everyone. I'm Liza. I'm the founder and lead organizer of the Providence Streets Coalition here. I lived, breathed, and ate this project for 3 years, kind of partnering with the city to do all the community engagement. So if you have questions about that, let me know while we walk. This is Honey Boy. He's the king of Broad Street. We ended up about 2 months after the installation actually moving to this neighborhood. And so now it's part of my everyday biking and walking route. John, rode with me the other day and we encountered some of the limitations, the growing edge around not having the bike signals. Your question was just about what?
I'm just curious, what is the latest with the bike shares? There's a couple
bike
comments.
share, yeah. So Spin, we have Spin, e-bikes, dockless, and CNU is contracting with them I will be leading all the bike tours for CNU if anyone is staying. See you tomorrow, or Thursday or Friday. And Spin is currently like gathering them all up to provide. But yes, they do exist, and they're dockless and pretty heavily used, and it's been since 2021 that we've had a contract with Spin. At first we had this jump, whole trash fire of a situation, if anyone wants to talk about jump bikes with me, and then now we're contracting with Spin.
So I want to add one more wonky point about the project. The initial funding for the City Walk vision was federal aid dollars. You know, came through the Fed, and there's a lot of requirements that have to be met to use federal aid dollars. And particularly on a low budget project, there's generally a mismatch. And you know, kind of regardless of this project, if you are a local municipality and you want to, you know, do a project, the federal aid process is not meant for tactical, quick build type of work. But nonetheless, that was the funding source for this project. And on top of everyone else, the Rhode Island Department of Transportation had to sign off on the design. And this design brought a lot to the table that they were not familiar with or comfortable with. And they had a lot of back and forth with the city. One of the aspects has to do with the center line. If you note the red, white, blue, that is intended to represent the Dominican flag, the colors of the neighborhood. That is actually not compliant with the manual traffic control devices. That would have negated the use of federal funds for this project. And it's interesting because just around the corner in Bristol, they have the exact same thing, that for the American flag, that is actually written into some legislation that is an exception for Bristol, and they're the only people in America that can do it. I think it was because the original 4th of July celebration was in Bristol. This was a huge battle here, and the city knew if they were unable to reproduce that Dominican flag centerline, this project was going to be a loss. And they eventually got fed up with the ride-out review and the consternation, and they just said, you know what, forget about it. They ended up putting their own money in to Broad Street. They paved with city funds and built the majority of this using city dollars at the end of the day. And it gives a lot more control for what you can do, and that was definitely a part of the story.
Jason, can you speak to the support that the city got from People for Bikes with the Big Jump Project, the Final Mile, and then also continuing on with City Thread and how they help support?
Sure. So City Walk was right on the precipice of People for Bikes, which is a nonprofit organization about promoting, obviously, bike use in cities. The City of Providence was selected for their Big Jump initiative to rapidly deploy a bike network. Not just one piece of infrastructure, but holistically throughout the city, kind of drop a network down, and that's where you're going to see your biggest mode shift use. So Toole was also engaged to first author their Great Streets Master Plan, which kind of identified the network, one of which is South Water Street, which I know, at least during CNU, if anyone's sticking around for that conference, is going to be a bit of a focus, because that is a hot button project right now here in Providence. And a lot of other infrastructure around the city. That Great Street Master Plan was then used to apply and support Safe Streets for All implementation grant. Providence got one of the first grants under the Biden administration for SS4A funding of $27 million, which is now still in active development, still being pushed through by the feds with the new administration. And there's going to be no shortage of, I think, Oneyville Square, Broadway, and South Water Street are the first 3 corridors here in Providence, and those are not tactical projects. Those are full build, projects.
I was just having a side conversation here about like the kind of the political reality of implementing projects like this, and the what Jason was alluding to about how some people have this attitude that it's maybe this project's not for me, whether that's how they feel about different people coming into their neighborhood, or I don't bike, so what is this doing for me? And that got me thinking about how the term urban trail, I feel like is kind of, cycle track or two-way bike lane, like these kind of like technocratic jargony names. And I like that Providence calls these urban trails, and I was gonna throw Liza on the spot to talk a little bit about that, why that is, and the sort of etymology of that.
Hey everyone. So as I was telling a couple of the folks, when I did community engagement for this project for like 3 years. And the real selling point in the community for doing this project was not installing a bike lane, but removing the center turning lane because of how dangerous it was and how everybody and their grandmother literally had an experience of a near miss or getting hit in the crosswalk just crossing the street, because you used to be crossing 3 lanes of travel, one of which was a really chaotic parking lane. High immigrant rates of immigrant communities. A lot of folks here not had formal driver education of a fun and vibrant and chaotic street before, and so we wanted to remove that center turning lane primarily for pedestrian safety, and folks really connected with that, and we're like, yeah, let's do it. And okay, I guess we're gonna get a bike lane. Sure, fine. My kid bikes, or his friends do. But why trails? So I started the Providence Streets Coalition as part of the People for Bikes Final Mile campaign, which was part of a grant cohort of 5 different cities, including Providence. And when we first started, they gave us some market-tested research that they'd done, messaging research with a real professional market research firm, testing different terms for things, how they connect with folks, crucially, who bike and do not bike. And what they found, if you're in this world, you know that bikes are a polarizing thing. Inexplicably, I don't know why. It's part of the culture war for some dumb reason. It makes 0 sense to me as a cyclist, but it is. It just is. And so taking the word bike out of everything, to be honest, that is why we are the Providence Streets Coalition and not the Providence Bike Coalition. And we work on transit and walking issues as well. But it was really important to take bike out of the name and to make it. And people love trails. People love paths, trails. They love safety. They love accessibility. They love community and safety. So it's about really taking that messaging in and putting it back out. So that's why. And if you are part of a bike coalition in your community, I would really strongly encourage you to think about rebranding. And I'm happy to talk to you about that.
Propel ATL did that. They used to be the Atlanta Bicycle Coalition, and now they're Propel ATL. And
that's such a great name.
It's a great name, and it includes they've merged with the pedestrian group.
Yeah, awesome. And we modeled after the Livable Streets Alliance in Boston, Denver Streets Partnership, New Orleans Complete Streets Coalition. So that's why we went with streets, and why the city went with urban trails and neighborhood greenways for their bike boulevards.
Thanks, Liza. So at the risk of feeding a fed horse, I think that the reason that we wanted to bring the Strong Towns crew to this project in particular is I think it's a good example of incrementalism and doing what you can sort of with the resources you have. Like a lot of communities are waiting for their $30 million raise grant to do a project like this. And I think what Providence is showing, thank you Sneha, I'm gonna speak up a little bit. What this project shows is, like Jason said earlier, it's not perfect. There's things that we might have done differently, but it's so much better than it was before, and they were able to do it quickly. And over time, a lot of the elements of this project could certainly be upgraded as money becomes available. The bollards could give way to a landscape planted median. If you ever like to visit other cities in Google Earth or in reality, Montreal is a great example, where if you go back in time on Street View, you can see so many examples of a facility or a street that started with paint and flex posts, and as you go forward in time, a lot of them have been converted to curbs and trees and landscaping and stuff like that. Same with the signals, like over time observing how they're working. If there's a place where that phase separation that I was talking about, where bike signals make sense, then we'll observe that and we can implement that. But we didn't spend a lot of money to put that into place, only to find out that it was the wrong solution, and now we wish that we had done something differently. So that's kind of my little summary.
Nice.
Jay,
I'll just add 2 quick points. It's City Walk Demonstration Day on YouTube if you do want to see the video. I'll also just point out about another block to 2 blocks south of here is the Bohm's Theater. I don't think the project can take credit for the theater being revitalized, but when we started this project, it was a completely derelict, vacant building. Now it's fully restored, just a few blocks south of here. And if you are so inclined, it's definitely worth taking a quick look.
Just a quick question. Have you found that this project has gotten anybody in the area asking for similar stuff on other streets around here?
Alex Ellis, the city planner, is, and Liza, you might be able to speak to that too, but Alex is on his way. So depending on how long we stick around, we will get to hear from him for the city's perspective. But Liza with the Streets Coalition might also be able to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so at the northern, unfortunately we weren't able to make the full connection at the northern end of this project all the way to downtown. And we hear that from people who bike all the time, how much they want that to happen. Unfortunately, it can't happen without parking removal. So, as we build the movement, the social movement, that's gonna take time. Then we have Elmwood Ave, which is on the other side of the neighborhood, and is a very similar urban arterial. Unfortunately, that one is state-owned. And so there's tons of demand for real safety changes on Elmwood, and that's not gonna happen until we get a new ride-out director. But yes, we hear people from Elmwood neighbors, why can't we, Broad Street's so much safer, what can we do on Elmwood?
I have a question about turning on red. Yeah. There's a big obvious sign here. Does that, and maybe you said it earlier and I missed it during the last part.
Say that.
But what did right turn on red change? What's
Yes.
the deal in Providence?
Well, this project, and I appreciate you bringing it up, brought no turn on red kind of ubiquitously along the corridor, which did not exist prior to the project. There was also somebody, when we were walking back from Moniker, just kind of observed the PED, signals crossing 95, and basically you have to hit the beg button. This project for Clifford Street, I believe, turned specifically those PED signals into auto recall, which may have been changed back.
It's kind of the only way you can do it with the bikes use PED signal, because you can't expect somebody to get off their bike and push the button.
So the LPIs all along Broad Street should certainly be, independent of the push button. But crossing 95 is another, huge aspect of the City Walk initiative. Broad Street connects to it, but there's a limited number of pedestrian crossings of 95 between these neighborhoods in southwest Providence and the downtown. And that was a huge connection. Liza wants to add to that.
Well, I've got 2 things to share that are really idiosyncratic aspects of this project that I think are fun to talk about. The first one is, so one of the constituencies on this street that was the most nervous and anxious about the project were the food truck owners. So at night on weekends, this is one of the only places in all of Providence where you can go and the food trucks are out till they're serving the people who come to the club. And they feel a lot of ownership over the street. And we had to negotiate. So I'm a believer that, parking spots can be repurposed and have higher and best uses. And so I was like, let's just designate some of the more limited parking spots for the food truck owners. And so there are a couple places along the street, they're kind of like Easter eggs, where you'll see an actual sign that says, "For chimney truck parking only." And we pushed really hard for that, and that like placated them a little bit. So encourage you to do that if you have food truck owners.
Alex, I feel like we're kind of in the autumn of our tour here, and we've covered a lot of ground, so if I could put you on the spot, I feel like maybe you'd be able to speak to, one, like the safety experience, sort of in, how it's been evaluated and
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying to some folks in my previous meeting that the experience here in the urban trail is like night and day compared to what it used to be. It used to be this chaotic, no dedicated space for bikes, the center turn lane, which I'm sure you've heard about. And now you still have to be careful when you're crossing a cross street. But besides that, you're like in this totally calm zone that you can feel relatively safe in. So that's the qualitative experience. Quantitatively, we did a little bit of analysis last year about before the urban trail was built and after, with using up to 2023 crash data. And you got to remember that for one corridor, for a relatively short amount of time, you got a lot of noise when it comes to crash data. But it was, I don't have the exact stats, but there were a couple serious injuries before on an average yearly basis, and there were none after. Minor collisions for cars, but also saw a reduction. There's more data for that. Across the board, all of the data points for crash data, it was an improvement.
And then the other piece, Alex, while you have the floor, we talked about like incremental design and how this was like a mix of quick build and permanent installation. But if you have any like lessons learned to share maybe on like elements that you might have done differently as far as like material choices, or like looking forward, what you would do, over time to make things more permanent and kind of just build on the quick build stuff that's out here.
Yeah, so this might have been said already, but we have a Safe Streets for All grant right now. One of the projects that we are hoping to spend that on is upgrades to the buffers where we've built paint and posts urban trails before, like here. We may not have enough funds to do everything, but especially on some of the pain points, we want to convert those paint and posts to something curbed. One of the big pain points for the community here and for the implementation several years in is the bus islands. You probably talked about this already. People have been hitting them with their cars, knocking over the signs. And so we've gone back and forth a bunch about how to deal with that. There's various ideas. One of the things we could do is take the taper that's just paint and posts right now, or just paint sometimes, and curb that so people are not arriving at the blunt front end of the island, not realizing it's there. That's one thing. The bus islands are the biggest thing we've been hearing from the community about it. The biggest thing is just when we're using temporary materials, best practice is to have a maintenance plan and a plan to upgrade, right? And we built this with sort of a vague plan for maintenance and a vague plan for upgrading, but having that more concrete at the beginning would have been helpful so that we could say, okay, let's have an inventory of replacement flex posts for when they get damaged, we can just boom, 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 put them right back in. That would be very helpful. And same with the upgrade. Let's have a specific time frame we're talking about, specific funding sources in mind. You don't always have that funding available to make that planning from the get-go, but to the extent you can, that's very useful.
You mentioned like crash trends overall, and we've heard about the center turn lane being an issue. Were there specific crash type trends that were like addressed with any certain treatments, or like they mentioned the bus islands making right turns a lot wider, and like was any of the design to treat specific crash trends?
Yes.
I defer to Jason. This was like 5 years ago that we were having these design conversations.
Yeah, I mean, just to the crash type we were most looking to address was the pedestrian, frankly, mid-block crossing. Right. And we added a number of crosswalks, the bus bulbs. I think actually this might have been one we added in front of the bus bulb at Potter's, which serves this grocery store. That was a big addition. Actually, no, I think it was this one right in the middle was the one that we added. And so, reducing the travel width, like the walking width, and reducing speeds, that's all kind of, and also providing better crossing locations, serve to, calm the traffic, but also consolidate those conflict points. And to Alex's point, haven't seen a serious crash in at least the data involving a pedestrian. That's a huge coup, because I think when we started the project, we said there were 84 crashes in a 5-year period. That was a serious injury to a pedestrian or bicyclist.
So, I don't know if this is a random question, but how did you decide which side of the street to put the bike path on?
I remember the answer to this question. I do. It was the number of driveway conflict points.
Okay, that's okay.
And you'll see, actually, if you notice that fire station, almost like there were less conflicts on this side, but you had one fire station, and that was a big, point to kind of work with the fire department and ensure that they were comfortable with the design.
So, okay, on that note about driveways, is there any plan in the city, was there any kind of look at the zoning or the land use along the corridor so that in future there are fewer driveways or the buildings interact better with the sidewalk and stuff like that?
So in Providence, we cannot close an existing curb cut without the owner's permission. That's one factor that we ran into here in a couple places. And in terms of zoning, we just updated our zoning from our new comprehensive plan, and I believe the zoning here is already very permissive. Already permits a lot of density. We don't have many, if any, of the I forget what it's called, like a little front parking lot that has multiple entrances compared to some places nearby. So no, short answer.
Okay. Probably just worth adding for context too. The reason why there was a double left turn lane down the center of Broad Street was there was formerly a streetcar that ran the length of Broad Street, which we had some nice.
Probably hence the name, Broad Street.
Yeah. Had some nice photo evidence of that. But I think that was just a remnant of space that just stayed in perpetuity for decades.
Yeah, it's like, like I said earlier, there's a tendency to kind of overbuild for cars, and it's like if you have the space, why wouldn't you put a center turn lane and free up capacity? And like, this is an intersection, it's so rare to see intersections, I feel like, on a arterial like this with no left turn lanes. And you could have fit it. You could have taken out a lane of parking and brought back in that center turn lane to make left turns easier. And in some places, that's the right thing to do for safety reasons. But here, I think it was just intentional that we're not going to overbuild for cars for capacity. I'd say that's fair.
And parking was a very sensitive topic.
Yeah.
So we were trying to minimize. There was some parking that was lost, but you're talking a very minimal amount of the parking stock that was out here. And most of it, I think, was up on the northern stretch.
And if it didn't come up before, that was one of the big design factors in this corridor. Up further, you probably saw it goes back to unprotected striped bike lanes, and that was purely because of parking. The city councilors and other neighborhood leaders here said, the businesses need to have enough on-street parking for their needs, or we won't go along with this project. And so that we made a trade-off there, safety for community acceptance. And it's sort of there's tension with that trade-off. We could go back in the future and retrofit to be safer, but we need the community buy-in to get there first, or along with it, before we do that.
Quick question for you, if you don't mind. Did I hear you correctly say one of the things you were thinking about in the future was adapting the bus bulb outs to sort of ramp the front of them?
No, to have the existing taper of the lane, so the lane goes around the bus island, right? And it's striped, that triangle is striped.
Okay.
And would it help people avoid the bus islands if that were curbed in some fashion? Maybe. Maybe not.
Yeah.
No worries. I was just wondering what the total cost of the project was, and what were the major expenses in it, and then what are perhaps ways to reduce the cost if people want a community wants something like this but doesn't have that.
I can answer that. $2.5 million all told. The biggest cost was resurfacing. If you didn't want it to be as expensive, you could not resurface. However, it would not look as good. And you do need to, there are some modifications that you're going to have to make when you're doing a project like this. I think I don't know if that triggered, no, the resurfacing was separate and we combined them, but you're gonna have to do some heavy construction no matter what when you're doing this.
What's the length?
Like 6,000, it's like a mile and a quarter.
Mile and
something
change,
like that. 2.5 million. By the way, it's 2:50, 3:30 is at the Omni, so we could continue this conversation at that bus stop and then people could just get on the bus as it comes.
Sounds good.
Let's do that.
Great.
Good job.
Hey, big round of applause for these guys.
Oh, thank you so much.
Hey, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this very special profile of the Strong Towns National Gathering tour of Broad Street. Hey, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below and share it with a friend. And if you haven't done so already, I'd be honored to have you subscribe to the channel. Just click on that subscription button down below and ring that notifications bell. And if you're enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Again, hey, it's super easy to do. You can just click on the join button right here on YouTube or navigate over to activetowns.org and click on the support tab at the top of the page. And hey, there's several different options there, including making a donation to the nonprofit, buy me a coffee, as well as becoming a Patreon supporter. Hey, patrons do get early and ad-free access to all my video content. And I really do want to send a huge thank you to all my Active Towns ambassadors supporting the channel financially. I simply could not do this without your help. Thank you all so very much. Well, until next time, this is John signing off by wishing you much activity, health, and happiness. Cheers.